What is going on, everyone? Jeremy here from MTG headquarters, and it is almost pre-release time. By the time this video drops, I will have released 2 other videos, and it will be Friday morning, at least for me. So it'll be roughly 15 hours before pre-release. All these primers will be a part of a playlist. So I've talked about the removal, I've talked about the mechanics, and now I want to talk about the synergies, and I want to rank the synergies, in my opinion, which ones are best. Now, I'm going to speak from a limited standpoint and specifically a sealed standpoint, because that's what people will be playing at pre-release. So I think I'm going to rank them from worst to best. So, UR spells, blue-red spells. I think it can be very good. You have the dragons that get bigger. You have 2, what do they call them? Signposts, so to speak, uncommons in the Enigma Drake and in the Bloodwater Entity. And both of these cards kind of want you to play spells. And they want you to play, for example, the new Bloodwater Entity is a 3-mana 2/2 flying with prowess, and when it enters the battlefield, you may put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. So you can recast the burn spell. You can do all sorts of interesting things. And you have Enigma Drake, which just gets bigger and bigger the more instants and sorceries you put in your graveyard. Now for draft, you could pick up a couple of Enigma Drakes. In fact, I've had seal pools that have had 3, but that's with 6 packs of Amonkhet, right? So we're not going to have a lot of access to the Enigma Drake, which I think is definitely the better of the 2. Although, I guess you could argue, if you have a really good removal spell, being able to put it back on top of your library is probably better. I guess they're both pretty good, but in general, I think UR spells is kind of the... there's probably 7, 8, maybe even as many as 10 or 11 kind of color combinations that you're going to see in sealed, but there's really only 5 that I think are worth considering, because they're the 5 that have the support in the uncommon slot. A lot of times you're going to end up with maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 or 4 of these, quote, signpost uncommons, and that's where your synergies really start to matter. That's where your 1 + 1 = 3, and then all of a sudden your 1 + 1 = 4 or equals 5. The more of these signpost uncommons and enabler cards that you have. Then I'm going to throw it to black-white mummies. I think black-white mummies is pretty good in Amonkhet. I think it's a fine mechanic, especially when you have quality signpost uncommons, like Wayward Servant, which is a 2-mana 2/2 that drains 1 every time you cast 1. And then you have Unraveling Mummy, which is a 3-mana 2/3, but you can pay to give a zombie lifelink or give it Death Touch. So that's a pretty strong ability, but you need a lot of support. You need, the Lord of the Accursed. You need the +2/+1 instant speed pump spell for mummies. You need both signpost uncommons. And although while black and white does open up a pretty nice removal package, I think that's just where I rank it. I think if you end up with a couple of the Wayward Servants, you can definitely pack in just a bunch of random mummies and then use a banner or a anthem effect or a trial to pump them all up and just go really wide and swing. It's definitely a very solid archetype, and I think it's probably better in draft than it is in sealed. Then you go to red-white, which I think is probably the best archetype in draft, given how fast the format is. But with sealed, if you run into early removal, you can definitely kind of brick out. You're playing your 2-mana 2/3s or your 3-mana 3/2s or whatever on turn 5 or 6. You're not really going to affect the board state that much. And that's why I think red-white gets a nod down. It drops down a little bit in the sealed format because, well, that, of course, is the format that we're going to be playing at pre-release. You have both Signpost Uncommons in Honored Crop Captain and Resolute Survivors, both very good, very aggressive, but you need stuff like Magma Sprays and Brute Strengths, things like that. You need stuff to win early trades or to clear the way for your attacks, and you need to be able to kill your opponent by turn 5 maybe. And red-white can do that, and it's not a terrible archetype to be in when it comes to sealed. It's just it's very heavily weighted to the early game. And then my last two, I think, are kind of I don't know, I would say even, or the last one that I matter. So we talked about blue-red spells. We talked about red-white aggro exert. We talked about a lot of different things. But so I'm getting lost a little bit here. Sorry about that. So we go to then blue-green ramp. I think blue-green ramp, this has 2 Signpost Uncommons that help you ramp with River, I'm going to say it wrong, Hoppa, and Weaver of Currents. This lets you ramp up. And again, if you get a couple of these, you can really weigh your seal pool heavily on 5, 6, and 7 drops, because your turn 2 and turn 3 will be kind of establishing your ramp crew, and then you can just be dropping nonstop 5, 6, 7 drops on turn 4, 5, and 6, and you can just outgrind your opponent. A couple of nice tricks. And the reason I think UG ramp, which I don't think is amazing in draft, I mean, any deck can be amazing, but I think it's better in sealed because green has a lot of big, like, vanilla 5/5s. That Colossopede, a 5-mana 5/5 for 5, pretty boring. But in sealed, you can play like 3 of those. And, you know, 5/5 is a hard thing to answer, or the hexproof 6/7. Or, you know, these are common and uncommon creatures in green that are very big and very hard to get around. There are a lot of 5/5s in blue that are just difficult to get around. And you can just eventually, through trading 2-for-1s and using some tricks smartly, win the long, grindy game. Now, the disadvantage to UG ramp is, of course, it gets run over by red-white pretty quickly. And it could get run over by mummies as well, or zombies. It's because even though you're ramping, you're still taking time. And then by the time you drop your fatties on like turn 4 and 5, they may have 6 creatures out, you know, and they're just too wide and you're too dead, too close to death to survive it. So what archetype do I think is best for sealed? In a perfect world, I think that it's still black-green. I think that black-green was one of the best in Amonkhet, and I think it just gets better with Hour of Devastation. Your signposts uncommons are things like Decimator Beetle, which is absurdly good. You can play like that Crocodile. There's so much counters. And then with Hour, you have another signpost uncommon, an Obelisk Spider, a 3-mana 1/4 with reach. But whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, put a -1/-1 counter on that creature. Whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This card is very powerful. There's all sorts of cards that put counters on stuff. There's creatures that put counters on stuff. There's all sorts of ways to interact with counters. And I think black-green, you know, in a perfect world, it has access to removal, it has access to pump, it has access to fatties, it has access to, you know, everything that you could want outside of, you know, flying creatures. But you've got reach with the Obelisk. Sometimes you can get flown over, so you've got to maybe play some vanilla creatures with reach, or you've got to reserve your removal for when you have a big flyer in the air that you need to get rid of. But I just think the counters game has the longest long game, and if you play something like Arcfiend, if you open that, you know, there's just a lot of value with the counters. It had the most synergy in the first pre-release round, and again, all of the important thing, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, really none of this matters, because it's all going to depend on what your pool is and what you open. I can say black-green I think is the best, but if you open red-white, you're going to play red-white. You want to play the pool that has the most synergies and the most bombs, period. Regardless of what the best is, you have no control over that. That is what I've learned. You learn that pretty quick when you go to pre-release. You can do all the planning you want in the world, and you can kind of set it all up however you want, but it doesn't really matter. It comes down to what you open. But that's how I ordered the archetypes, the top 5 archetypes for Hour of Devastation. I'd be curious to hear how you might order them. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.